All right, welcome everyone. My name's E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and I'm here today with Carter Sickels. Carter Sickels is the author of The Prettiest Star. We are really excited to be doing a pre-publication special pre-order party. We, because of coronavirus and everything else, the date for the publication of this book got shifted around a little bit. And so what we wanted to do was get folks as excited as possible about this book in advance. We know that you are going to love it. And I actually got to read this book almost probably 6 months ago at this point. And so I've been like chomping at the bit to get it in people's hands. It is a beautiful and exciting book. It is a timely book. And so I've asked Carter here to have a conversation with me. But first, we wanted to start out with a reading. This book is in multiple voices. And so we wanted to give you a taste of everybody's voice and sort of an overview of the book. And then we're going to do some question and answer. We're going to invite y'all at the bottom of the screen. You have the ability to ask a question. So please do, as we're talking, it is not at all disruptive to go in there and type a question. You can also chat on the side. Please, if you know Carter, some of y'all have already said hi. I know Jessica Handler, who is a fellow Hub City author, is on the line. Jessica, feel free to share anything you want to say. So we're going to make this as interactive as possible. We're really thrilled to have y'all here. We want this to be just fun and casual, and to talk about some really important themes that are coming up. This book is unfortunately, strangely, very timely with coronavirus, and so we're learning a lot. Jessica says she's logged on as her husband Mickey, so but mazel tov to Carter. So let's just dig right in, and then we'll have some conversations. So welcome, Carter. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me. This is great. Thank you all for showing up, and thank you to Charis Books and to ER. And also thank you for that amazing blurb you gave the book when you read it a few months ago. I felt like you really understood what I was trying to do with the book and got it in this way that was really meaningful to me. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the book. I'll tell you about it for those of you who haven't read it yet. But so it's set in 1986, and it's about Brian Jackson, a young gay man who's been living in New York City, and he's diagnosed with HIV, and he returns to his small town in Appalachia, Ohio. And the novel switches from his point of view, his mother Sharon's point of view, and his little sister Jess. Jess is 14, and so she hasn't seen her brother in 6 years, and she didn't know why he left or why he's come back. So his parents want to keep his HIV status and his his HIV status a secret, and his sexuality a secret. So I'm going to read just very short sections from each of the characters, and I'll just give you a little setup each time. And I also wanted to say hi to Sarah, I see you there, and also Heather and Stephen, I think, are here. So thanks y'all for coming. So I'll first read from Jessa's perspective. So she's 14. She has a thing for whales. She's really obsessed with killer whales. And this is early in the novel when her mother has just told her that Brian's going to be coming back. And they're in the middle of watching Jacques Cousteau. And so her mother has just told her, and now her mother goes back upstairs. And so Jess is alone watching TV. The invisible man on TV, in his trusting, all-knowing voice, explains they still don't know where the blue whales go to breed, somewhere deep in the ocean that scientists can't pinpoint. As a marine biologist, I will work for National Geographic or NOVA. I'll go out on a boat in the middle of the ocean, no signs of land for miles. Blue, more blue. Brian and I used to watch the show together. One time, he brought home the record humpback whale. and we listened to it stretched out on our backs across the carpet, pretending we were floating in the sea. I dust off my hands. My mouth tastes salty and dry. A sperm whale lifts its gigantic, wrinkled head out of the dark water, and then the screen goes to static. The tape ran out before the show ended. I curl my knees up to my chest, wrap my arms around them. Suddenly I feel very small. I haven't seen my brother since I was 8 years old. Sometimes Brian would let me come in his room and we'd listen to records and play Go Fish, candles dripping wax, David Bowie singing about moon age daydreams and outer space and a starman, thick flowery scent of incense. Brian blew cigarette smoke out the cracked windows, talked about California, New York, dream states, he said, where people went to be free. After he left, my parents told me he was away at college. I didn't know anyone who'd gone to college, and I believed them for a couple of years until my grandmother told me the truth. He'd gone to New York, which to most people in Chester made about as much sense as saying you were going to live on Mars. If you left, you'd meet the same fate as Major Tom and his tin can. There are other stories about him, too. When I was younger, I told kids at school about the movie stars and rock singers he hung out with, the parties, the money. I never knew any of this. I made up a life for him. I had to, because he just disappeared. Like those missing kids on milk cartons, but nobody kidnapped him. He just went. My parents, except for those early lies about college, don't talk about him. Nobody does except my grandmother. She tells stories about my brother and has never doubted one day he would come back home. Does it sound okay? You can hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
So now I'm going to switch to Sharon's point of view. This is later after Brian has come back. And it's just a scene with her and her husband, Travis. I'm not outside for more than a few minutes when I hear the door. Afraid it's Jess, I stub out the cigarette. I don't want her to know I've started smoking. But it's Travis, still in his work clothes, smelling of cheap beer and sweat. He squints, sounds hurt. You're smoking? Since when? I don't remember. I started a month or two ago. I relight the cigarette, and Travis lifts his eyebrows and makes us sound surprised. He doesn't look good. Heavy eyes, the skin around them pinched, gray black stubble, thick mustache. He needs to shave. I don't know what I'm sorry for exactly, but I am. We have not made love since Brian's been home. I made you a plate, I say. You want me to heat it up in the microwave? No, I had a burger at the refuge. I can't force them to spend time together. I've mentioned to Travis that maybe they should go to a ball game, but he just says, we'll see. I've seen how Brian looks at him, the longing in his eyes. The sun flattens into a thin red line. Next door, the Pentecostal girls' prairie dresses hang limply from a clothesline like drabber versions of themselves. Travis comes closer, doesn't touch me. The evening light spreads cloud-like across the yard, turning trees into tall, still shadows. I feel his body tense next to mine, the hushed silence, the weight of what he wants to say. Today, at work, Wayne asked me what was wrong with Brian. Travis pauses, wants to know what is really wrong with him. He can't stand the thought of disappointing his big brother, can't stand the thought of embarrassing or disgracing the family. Did you tell him, I ask? Are you kidding? Do you know what he'd do, what he'd say? I remember not very long ago, Wayne said people with AIDS should be sent to a faraway island. And every one of us, me, my husband, my nephews and nieces, we all agreed wholeheartedly. Protect the good from the bad, the normal from the abnormal, the innocent from the infected. They know something is going on, Travis. Maybe we should tell them. He has not said the word yet. Maybe he never will. And I'll continue to go along with the charade, because what else can I do? My son is sick. My son is dying. No, no, no. If we don't say these words, they will not be true. But I can't keep hiding, not like this. No, Travis says with finality. We can't tell them. Nobody can know. All right, and then just one last section here. So this is Brian. You hear Brian's voice. And he's been home maybe about 2 months. And so Brian is a video artist, and he's documenting his summer home with his family, and he makes these sort of video monologues. So his sections are all sort of dated, and it's as if he's talking to the viewers or the readers, I guess. And Brian's grandmother is really the only one in the family who fully accepts him and kind of supports him. June 27th, 1986. Today I was watching TV with my grandmother, and Tammy Faye Baker was on, singing about Jesus, and Mamaw looked at me. Honey, even if you don't go to church, God will still listen to your prayers, she says. Good Lord, was she telling me to get right with God? Does she worry I'm heading to hell? Tammy Faye doesn't seem to believe in a punishing kind of God, and I don't think my grandmother does either. As Tammy Faye blinked her mascara-thick lashes, I was reminded of drag queens I knew in New York. I wouldn't mind going to church with Tammy Faye, I said, especially if she'd let me do her makeup. Mamaw giggled. Big alligator tears started to run down Tammy Faye's glittery pink cheeks. Oh, there she goes. Anything can set her off, Mamaw said. When I was little, on Avon nights, we'd sit at the table, and Mamaw would make lists of what she'd sold and what she needed to reorder. I'd help organize everything, lining up mascara wands, tubes of lipstick, flat-pressed squares of eyeshadow, moisturizer that smelled like flowers, eye cream. I loved the dark green bottles of perfume, the elegant gold cases of rouge. My grandmother didn't care if my hands fluttered. She asked my opinions. She trusted my taste. I think Mamaw would love to see a drag queen. Sometimes I'd help friends with their makeup, but I only did drag a couple of times myself. I never performed or went out in public, didn't have the nerve or the courage. But still, when I sat in front of a mirror and brushed on blush and eyeshadow, glued on eyelashes, I felt a wild shock of delight. Boys came to me because I had the right touch. A few of them are dead, others sick, others infected. They were thrilled to be wearing makeup and sparkling gowns and wigs, and to be free from their father's disappointment and shame. They were so beautiful. Stop there.
Thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about, sort of, I guess, start at the beginning, how you came to write this book and how you found these voices and these characters?
Yeah, I started the book, I think around 2013. I'd had this idea for a while. I was sort of keeping like a list of possible stories or maybe novel ideas. And one of them was about a young man who was diagnosed with HIV and writing a novel about the 80s, which is when I grew up, and what that would look like for him to come back to his small town after he'd been living, in a queer community and living very openly in New York for 6 years. And then the actual impetus for it, though, I think, and I didn't tap into that right away, but I remembered watching this episode of Oprah when I was 13 or 14, where a man who was HIV positive in West Virginia went swimming in the town swimming pool and was kicked out and was barred from coming back. And Oprah did this big special at the town in West Virginia. And I don't know, it made an impression on me. It sort of stuck with me when I was a kid, and I didn't understand why at the time. And I thought about that episode a lot, and I've gone back to watch it, and you can only find clips of it now online. But it's really intense to watch because the audience, which is members of the town, are so sort of vitriolic. And, there's one guy who gets up and says, gay men will be eradicated. Like, this is nature's way of taking care of gay people. And everyone in the audience claps. And this man is sitting there on stage. And I think in a way, like, that stuck with me, but I don't think I was surprised by that because that was such sort of like normal speak in the 80s.
Yeah.
But I do think what maybe stuck with me was seeing a gay man from a small town in Appalachia who was very out and very brave in this way, kind of telling his story, because there just wasn't representation. Like, I don't remember seeing a lot of queer people on TV unless they were, villains or sort of clowns. So, I wasn't conscious of that when I was 12 or 13 or 14, but it certainly kind of stuck with me.
you and I are around the same age, and I think I remember I grew up in Atlanta, which is there were around lots of gay people and had lots of gay neighbors, but I remember very clearly, like I was very interested in HIV and AIDS, and I, without really knowing why, I felt like that I was susceptible to it. And I, like as a child, I was not susceptible to it, but in my mind, it's interesting to me as an adult to think about the reasons why I identified with or paid really close attention to narratives about HIV and AIDS,
Right.
Because there was something about it that hooked my imagination. And I was like, something about, these figures or my neighbors who were dying at that time was like, oh, there's something about you that is like me, even if we're not the same. And so there was a piece of that sort of in this book that, resonated with me. And even in the story that you just told, like, what are the things from your childhood that you remember? And that was one of the questions I had about why set this book in the 80s, why not set it later, even in the 90s when the HIV and AIDS narrative is a little further along. So how did you choose 1986?
Yeah, I did sort of change that a couple of times, like earlier on in the novel. And I'd started it out earlier, I think around 85, which was the year that Rock Hudson died. And then I was reading And the Band Plays On, which is sort of formative book about the AIDS epidemic that was written right around that time. I think it was written in 87. And I don't know, I was thinking about Rock Hudson and how, because he talks about that in the book, of like, it did kind of create this shift in the country where already, of course, thousands of people had died, but they were gay men at that time, for the most part. And so most of America was just ignoring it, right? But when Rock Hudson died, it really brought kind of AIDS into like the public or mainstream consciousness, I think. And also, I think it was like, this idea that not just that people could die of AIDS, but that the people that we know or people we love, but also, Rock Hudson was such an interesting character because he was so sort of this uber masculine, straight hero, but he was a closeted gay man. So I was thinking, so 86 was kind of an interesting, 85, 86 was kind of an interesting year for that. And then I guess I didn't want to set it too early because there, you see the homophobia from the town and the way that the family is harassed and Brian is harassed, and he's kicked out of a swimming pool. And like by 1986, people knew how HIV was transmitted. And so I guess I didn't want to give the town or the family the sort of way out. Like, oh, it's so early. It's 1981 or 1983. We don't really know what's happening. And then another reason I kind of settled in on 86 was the 90s, which is, when I was kind of going to college and much more aware of queer communities and AIDS. There's such a bigger story to tell there, I think, with activism and ACT UP and AZT. And like, I kind of wanted to keep this sort of more contained. So 86 is really this pivotal year. It's like a year after Rock Hudson has died, but it's a year before ACT UP is started. So there's all sort of anger brewing in New York and rage, although the queer community has been taking care of each other for years. So that was kind of how I zeroed in on that particular year.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the role of television throughout this book, because I think it's really interesting. I mean, you read Jess's part where she's watching Jacques Cousteau, and then Brian's part where he's watching Tammy Faye Baker. They're all of the, and then you didn't quite say this, but there is a newscaster woman who's sort of not quite an Oprah figure, but there is a sort of analogous situation that happens in the book. So TV actually plays a substantial role in some ways, and as this sort of voice from the outside, or a, you know, an educating force in a lot of ways. And so I thought a lot about sort of how culture gets transmitted to rural areas, and, you know, what we learn of the outside world, you know, if we are more, you know, more isolated. So I wondered, you know, kind of how much you are aware of that as you were writing, or if that emerged as a theme later.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I think people have really tapped into the music part of it, and because there's so many Bowie references and how that's layered into the book, and nobody's really asked about the TV. But yeah, I mean, I think that television was so you know, I mean, it's like very pre iPhones, and right, and it was just like that was our entertainment in the '80s. And I grew up in out in the country, so you know, we didn't have a lot of TV channels. It was like PBS, and then we started to get more. And MTV was, of course, such a strong influence in the '80s. So I just remember watching like a lot of TV. I remember listening to a lot of music, you know, making my mixtapes, reading. But there was a real sense of just like kind of being in your room when you were a kid, and doing those things. And then the TV was sort of centered, you know, the family was. But yeah, I mean, I think that it was sort of fun in a way to bring in those details of the '80s, with the television shows and the way we get our kind of information, or way we got our information then, because you know a lot of the book is, especially the research I was doing was be really intense and sort of heavy and dark, and so the TV and pop cultural stuff allowed me a little bit of levity and some joy with that.
Yeah. I loved it, and it, as particularly in this moment of social isolation and coronavirus. I mean, I'm thinking a lot about how we're getting information. It feels a little. I mean, obviously, we're taking in information via the internet, but you know, it has some of that communal feel of, you know, we're all sitting around and taking in these sources, in a more isolated way than certainly I have been since I was a child. And it's a reading your book and sort of going back over it today reminded me of, yeah, this is where they're all getting their ideas about who, you know, who you can be, right? Like the Jacques Cousteau is Jessa's sort of possibility model, you know, or like, you know, or, you know, like Bowie or anybody else, right? That like, these are everything you know about cities comes from TV, right? I mean, and everything, you know, I think it leads really well into the question of queerness and how we know what queerness is, and particularly in the '80s, how a kid like Brian would know what gay culture was. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about like how Brian, obviously there's an organic and intrinsic sense of self and sense of queerness, but how you thought about Brian's coming of identity.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, he first listens to David Bowie when he's a kid. I think first hears his record when he's like maybe 12 or something, and it just sort of opens up his world. I mean, he's living in small town Appalachia, Ohio. Like the way that Bowie was so just kind of really breaking like these boundaries of gender and sexuality, and just this sort of electric, magnetic, you know, being and creature. I think, and it was no one else was listening to that music. You know, I mean, Brian, he's a very talented baseball player too, so he hangs out with a lot of jocks, and when he's in high school, and this was sort of his. I don't know. It was like Bowie symbolizes sort of possibility, right? There are other ways of being, and all the maybe feelings that he had internally, kind of he could express that through David Bowie's music.
One of the things that I've thought a lot about in terms of the trajectory, both of the mainstream gay rights movement, but also of our literature, is that there's been a real pressure to tell redemptive stories and happy stories and stories where straight people do the right thing. And with the exception of, a handful of folks like Sarah Schulman and Matthew Sycamore Bernstein, like there are not that many of our queer storytellers who really have consistently told the truth about familial homophobia, which continues to be a huge driver for self-harm and a lot of the sort of suffering that queer people deal with comes from familial homophobia first, but often long after we leave our family homes. And so I wonder if you could say a little bit about sort of the politics of telling the truth about familial homophobia as a writer, because I think there are still people who would like us to tell redemptive tales, optimistic story. And I think there is optimism in this book, and I actually think there is a lot of redemption in this book, but it's not in the sort of happy-go-lucky HRC way that I think many of us have been sort of brainwashed or forced to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I think Sarah Schulman's work has been really important for me in the way that she talks about familial homophobia, because it is something that is, I guess, doesn't show up a lot in literature, and especially in sort of these complicated ways. And I think that it's often set up as a sort of binary of like a family is either supportive of their queer kid or they completely just disown, right?
Right.
There's huge, like, complicated gray, like liminal space between them. And, I've certainly had to experience that. I know many people have, where family members are sort of, it's almost like the don't ask, don't tell is one layer of it. Or we sort of accept you with these conditions, right? And it's this complicated thing because it's like, I think that sometimes it's oversimplified in the media if a queer person does kind of is either rejected from their family or makes the decision to cut their family out of their life. It's a very difficult kind of decision, right? It's not something that people can just sort of say, okay, I'm done and I'm never going to see my parents again for all their flaws or mistakes. I think it can just be such a much messier, more complicated ball of wax. And so I wanted to kind of get at that in this book. And I think that, there's a lot of cruelty that you see from the family. But then there are moments of real love where and especially with Sharon, who's the mother, where it's like you see her really trying to get to this better place, to become sort of more evolved. But she herself has been living in this town that's very conservative with this kind of ideology that she doesn't know how to break out of. And so she's kind of wrestling with that. But I guess I was thinking too about like this idea of this don't ask and don't tell, and this sort of denial that a lot of families have with their queer kids. And it's like, even when the child is like dying, right? Like literally dying in their house, and they're still more worried about the neighbors finding out, that he's gay. I mean, it's almost like their shame is more about the queerness than it is about AIDS. And I think that was a really interesting thing in the 80s and 90s, was how those kind of wrapped up together. So it's like the shame of queerness, the shame of the disease, and the fear around that as well.
Yeah. One of the things that I thought was really beautifully done, that I couldn't think of another book that had done this so well, and I think it's part of what that resonated so deeply with me, is the way that you portrayed that misogyny and homophobia being so intertwined. And so, like, both Sharon and Lottie, who's a grandmother, they really want Brian to be well, and they want to love on him, and they want to take care of him, but they are very bound up in this patriarchal system where Travis and to a certain extent Uncle Wayne are exerting a lot of control over the situation, and basically the two women who are the matriarchs of the family are at various points kind of walking on eggshells to manage these two men's behavior, and particularly in relation to Brian, right? And like that sort of allows homophobia to bloom. It's like because they are having to deal with misogyny and patriarchy,
Right.
that's what allows this homophobia to really take root. And I thought that you did that so subtly, but it was so I was like, God, that's every family holiday I've ever been to, right? And I couldn't think of another book where I had really seen that expressed. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like how you thought about the relationships, particularly between men and women, in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, I mean, I think you really articulated it well. So this is the family structure, right? And there is less. I mean, there's a scene in the novel where Letty actually kind of gets up and walks out of the church, and Sharon, it's like she can't do that, and part of that is because of her husband and that sort of control that it's almost kind of like an unconscious control that he has over her, and of course the minister is also a man, and it's just you can see this the control over women, but also over queerness, I think, through these figures, and so I was thinking of like the relationships between the men and women. I mean, I think that Letty's kind of interesting because she is somewhat of the matriarch of this family because her husband is dead, and she has all these sons, and so there are places in the novel where she actually, I think, can kind of, part of it is maybe her age and where who she is in the family, where she can stand up for Brian in a way that Sharon is too afraid to do, or too timid, or just too, she buys into the ideology, I guess. But I was also thinking of like misogyny and homophobia and masculinity and the relationship between the men, you know, especially between Brian and his father. And I wanted to get at these, you know, complicated father-son relationships, and that I think can be presented also in a sort of simplistic way, and get to how Travis's love for his son is there, but he is also he can't access his own feelings. You know, he's so sort of impenetrable to the other characters as well. Like, I mean, you can really see just this what this sort of toxic masculinity can do in terms of like not being able to face your own emotions, to access them, to talk to anyone. I mean, he really just kind of cuts himself off from everyone in the family because he can't face his fear, his shame.
Yeah, I think that you really do drive home sort of the losses, why toxic masculinity hurts men, right? It's like it's so you feel for Travis, even when you're mad at Travis for the ways that he has harmed his family. I had a deep empathy for him throughout the book because he's the loneliest character in the book, and I think there's a real compassion for him from you. And some of his scenes where he's struggling with his feelings are the most sort of beautiful and eloquent scenes, which I think there's a real contrast between the way you're describing his very stunted emotions and, you know, the actual, there's a great sort of irony there, textual irony between your language, which is beautiful, and his state, which is very sort of shut down and stunted. So I thought that was really, particularly towards the end of the book, a really interesting contrast. So it looks like we have a couple questions from the audience, so I want to weave those in. So the first person said, could you talk about the multiple points of view in light of previous books, like Sound and the Fury and Poisonwood Bible, and why you chose this manner of writing the book? Thanks. That's from, I think, Sarah. Oh, sorry, I just pulled Sarah's profile up. Yes, from Sarah Dorsey.
Hi, Sarah. Sarah and I were at VCCA together, and we took many walks in Virginia looking at the fireflies. So, yeah, William Faulkner's, not so much The Sound and the Fury, but As I Lay Dying, because I was teaching that book and I've read it so many times, and that book was one that I was really thinking about as I was working on this. Part of it was just to challenge myself as a writer. My first book was in third person, limited to one character's perspective. So I wanted to try to write have multiple narrators. I also felt like this story, it just felt very natural because it is Brian's at the center and he's returning to his home, but it's so much about this family and this, and how they engage with this, the town around them. So I thought, to just get at that kind of tension between the characters, I needed to kind of shift into their perspectives. And with the three, what kind of creates this triangle, and so that was sort of interesting because you get the tension between each of them. You see how they overlap, but also, and this was maybe some of the influence of Faulkner, I think that there's so much, you said loneliness with the father, but I think so many of the characters, it's like this family, but each one of them are so sort of alone and kind of dealing with their own pain and their own secrets and their own kind of narrative arc. So but it started out with just kind of Brian and Jess, and then Sharon came in maybe a few months into writing it, and that really opened up the novel in a way because she's a character for me that's has so much sort of conflict and internal conflict, and also has like a long way to go in sort of the way that she can evolve. But I also, it felt really important to me for Brian to have his sections. Like I didn't, and I think this was like a pattern you saw a lot in like the 80s and 90s of these books or movies about kind of like a family's agony about their son coming out or their son dying of AIDS. And like, I wanted to resist that. Like I didn't want the queer person not to be centered in the narrative. So that felt really important for me that this would be Brian's story and that he would get a lot of time in the narrative and a lot of space.
How did you choose Jess's sort of, for lack of a better word, like demographics? Like how did she end up being 14? How did she end up being in the sort of place that she was in her character?
I don't know. I think I had started out with her a little bit younger actually, but I thought teenage, it's such a complicated time. And so she is, I think that's a really interesting age. And I feel like 14 in rural Ohio in 1986 was also it's a younger 14 than maybe 14 now.
Yeah.
But it's like she, her brother is her hero and she loves him so much, but that she's like she doesn't know why he left or why he's come back, and everything about him is a secret. And she's like this very savvy kid trying to navigate this world of adults. So I wanted her to be like wise enough to, not that a younger kid can be wise, but I think just to articulate kind of what was going on around her, but still be very young and not to really grasp what this meant. Yeah. you know, queerness or AIDS or any of that.
I thought that sort of the parallel. I mean, one of the things that I certainly have experienced as a queer person is there can be a kind of stunting or a kind of perpetual adolescence if you're not allowed to be fully out. This idea of like you're not. I mean, particularly in the 80s and 90s, obviously a lot has shifted in our culture in the last 10 years, even. But this idea of like you're not going to grow up and get married, you're not going to have kids, you're not going to do these other things. So you kind of are in this endless teenagehood. And, you know, I think this idea that she is in the beginnings of teenagehood and, you know, sort of figuring out her identity, and he knows his identity, but he's not really allowed to share it. I thought that was an interesting kind of parallel where she's just starting to figure out who she might like to date or like how she wants to be like expressing her gender and sexuality, but like, you know, she can't even really connect with him on that level because he can't really talk about it.
Right. Yeah, because for so much of the book, Brian kind of keeps that a secret, which is this really, you know, sort of heartbreaking thing of living this very out life and then coming back to a small town and kind of going back in the closet.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a follow-up question about Jess from Gina. Gina wants to know more about the role killer whales play in the book. Since that's a question about Jess, let's go there next.
Yeah. The killer whales came into it. I think I'd actually watched that documentary about SeaWorld. It's called Blackfish. So it was around 2013. But I was thinking a lot about Jess and like what TV shows she would watch and what music she would listen to. And so I started thinking about those PBS shows that always seemed to be on when I was a kid. And it was a way for me to kind of tap into her character. Once I watched that documentary, I started thinking about whales and Jess having this kind of fascination with whales. And like the whales, in a way, gave me a way into her language. You know, so some of her, not all of her sections, but some of her sections start with a sort of these factoids about whales. And so one way was just kind of thinking about her voice. But I think the whales also give her a sense of possibility and hope and dreaminess in the way that Bowie does for Brian, maybe. And then I did a lot of research on whales and watched a lot of documentaries and read some books. And, you know, as I continued on writing it, it's interesting how that stuff, those kind of images or threads then start to resonate more. So the more I learned about whales and sort of their familial sort of structure, how they mourn their dead, you know, really kind of resonated with some of the themes that the book is happening.
So Jessica wants to know, can you talk about what the AIDS crisis shows us about how we should live and treat each other now? She says, P.S. I love the relationship between Brian and his grandmother. I do too.
Yeah, I felt I needed someone in a family to be just accepting of Brian, and so the grandmother played that role. Yeah, I mean, I think that Yara and I were talking about this just for a minute yesterday, but I hope one of the questions that this book asks is like, how do we treat people with compassion and care? How do we take care of each other and love each other? And so that, you know, is something that I think, you know, we're seeing now. It's like, how are we going to take care of? Not that AIDS is the same as a coronavirus, and I don't want to make any easy parallels, but it is strange to have this book coming out at this moment. And so I'm thinking about like what we can draw from that period. And that's something that I keep coming back to, is like the compassion and taking care of each other. I mean, I think there's also going to be a lot that we can learn from ACT UP and other activists. about what we can do with our rage and how we can create real change, because they really did change, the way pharmaceutical companies had this sort of power, the government. I mean, it's so different, but then there are sort of these parallels, right? With what's going on with our federal government and what was going on in the 80s. I mean, as some of you know, like Reagan took no action for many, many years. He never even said the word AIDS until I think 87, which was already after like 50,000 people had died. So.
I mean, and I'm even seeing people echo that famous "If I die, put my body on the steps of the," and I think people are sort of echoing that in their protests right now. I mean, I think absolutely there's going to be so many lessons that we can learn from ACT UP and from the disability justice communities that came out of people who became disabled because of HIV and AIDS. So I think that's something I've been thinking a lot about. And thinking also, we talked a little bit yesterday as we were getting ready for this about all of the kids, the queer and trans kids or students who now are, maybe they'd gone away to college or had, maybe they're young adults and they've been working, and now because of the economy, because of losing jobs, because of their schools being shut down, have had to move back into their families' homes with potentially parents who are homophobic or transphobic, and are living a reality perhaps very similar to what Brian lives in this book, which is to suddenly have to cut off so many parts of themselves to be, materially safe, physically safe, to have a place to stay and food to eat, but at what cost? And I think as adult queer and trans people, how do we think about supporting those young folks? I mean, that's something that's weighing very heavily with me these days, and that came up a lot for me as I was rereading this book.
Yeah, because Brian, I mean, he's kind of he's shooting these videos like in his parents' basement, sort of in this closeted space. But I too am concerned about my students who are going back to these kind of families sometimes that are not so accepted, and how they're going to survive that. And I mean, I think it is good that there's ways that they can connect virtually, and but that can be hard for some people living in more rural areas that just don't have that kind of access.
I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the difference, the sort of nuances around being a Southern writer versus an Appalachian writer versus a rural writer, and kind of where you draw the Venn diagrams around those things for yourself, and if any of those labels are things that you feel excited about or totally hate, or
No, I mean, I don't hate any of them. I think it's been really interesting to see me like kind of being able to move in these different spaces, because the book is, it's set in Ohio, but it's set in Appalachia, Ohio. So it's getting picked up. It's being recognized by Appalachia, of course, in the South, but also it's in the Midwest. It's Ohio is such a kind of interesting place in that way. And of course, I live in Kentucky now, so I've got the southern part covered, I think. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, I think in some ways, Appalachia is a part of the South, and I don't want to get into like all the differences and how those worlds are, but I think that Appalachia is often a place that's overlooked, even within the sort of category of the South. And then I think Ohio, southeastern Ohio, is this really interesting place that's overlooked by Appalachia. I mean, it's kind of this really invisible corner of Ohio in the southeastern part of the state. So I guess I was sort of thinking about that with the book, and how it's this beautiful, beautiful part of the country, but very isolated, and very sort of forgotten. And now dealing with a lot of the same issues that much of Appalachia is dealing with, and I'm sure a lot of the South is dealing with opioid, the opioid epidemic, and lack of jobs and employment and access to healthcare. So I don't know. I think I fit in all of those sort of spaces as a writer.
Are there people who you look to as literary role model, like contemporaries that you look to as literary role models, people who are alive?
Yeah, I mean, so many. I mean, Dorothy Allison has always been hugely important for me, as just someone who's writing the hard stuff and who's been so out and queer, and not afraid to show the hard stuff about families, you know.
Yeah.
I think Jim Grimsley is like a great writer whose work is really overlooked. Georgia.
Yeah. Right down the road from us.
But it's just someone who was really dealing with like the rural and queer intersection, which is something that you don't see a lot of, you know. I mean, so those were sort of like earlier, I guess, influences.
Can you talk a little bit about your first book and also the exciting development in regards to what's happened with that?
Yeah, so my first book was The Evening Hour, and it was published in 2012, and then it was filmed and made into a feature film that shot it, or that premiered, I'm sorry, at Sundance in 2020, which was like the end of January. So I got to go. We were all there. It's very strange and exciting. But, you know, then it was like a month later. Everything was sort of shut down. So I did get to, that was like my last trip, I guess. Yeah, and you know, we're sort of waiting. We don't have distribution yet. I think everything's kind of slowed down now because of the coronavirus. But yeah, it was a really incredible experience, and just thrilled that the story maybe can live on in this other form.
What were your sort of takeaways or surprises from having your work translated to film?
I was so thrilled to have it, that it would happen, and the director Braden King took a lot of care he shot it in Harlan, Kentucky, and so he really, I think, captured the soul of the book in terms of the place, and he was very connected to people in the community, and so a lot of local people who lived there had some connections, got some work to work on the film or even to be in it. So that was great. I think, yeah, and I mean, of course, they made quite some changes, but I sort of knew that going into it. I did learn if you want to write a book, a novel, and you want it to be adapted, that you maybe shouldn't have quite so many characters or so many locations. So, you know, God, there's so many locations in this novel, and there's so many characters. So they did have to sort of cut back with some of that.
So streamline if we're trying to make it to film. What did you learn as a writer? Like, how do you think your craft developed or changed from your first book to your second book?
That's a great question. They were such different books in a way, you know, because, like I said, I wanted to challenge myself with the multiple narrators, but also with first person point of view. I'm more comfortable in third person, so that was kind of a challenge for me. I think The Evening Hour took longer. It was about 6 years, 7 maybe. This one was about 5. So I felt like I had a better sense at some point, kind of like how to organize it or like to understand the arc of it. Whereas The Evening Hour, it took a lot of just kind of writing and rewriting to really even understand what the arc would look like and what the narrative would be about and which scenes would be in it. And this one felt a little bit more clear, I guess.
That's hopeful for everybody who's a writer. Gets slightly more organized the longer you go. We can all hope for that. Well, I want to see if anybody else has other questions. Feel free. Oh, so Libby Ware asks, are you in a critique group?
I'm not, but I want to be. I actually, you know, I was wanting to get like a writing group together. So figure out a way to do that. Because I teach and I think it's so valuable, and I miss kind of being in a workshop or even just being sort of accountable to each other. So Jessica, ER, make this happen.
Elizabeth Glass would like to know if you could talk a little bit about the research that you did for the novel.
Yeah. I did do a lot of research. I mean, like I said, I grew up in the 80s, so some of it was just sort of my memories of what that period was like. But I did quite a bit of research on the AIDS epidemic and AIDS activism. So I mentioned in the band played on a lot of Sarah Schulman's work, My American History, about New York in the 80s. Borrowed Time, which was a memoir by Paul Nanette. And why am I blanking? Oh, My Own Country by Abraham Verghese, which was just such a touchstone and a really important book for me. And I actually read it when I was working on the evening hour. But it's about his experience living in East Tennessee as he was Indian American doctor, infectious disease doctor, and he did his sort of residency, I think, in Eastern Tennessee. And he, when AIDS starts showing up in like 86, 87, in that part of the country, and just trying to be an advocate there and a healthcare worker when there was, again, like so much shame and misinformation about AIDS and HIV. But yeah, I read a lot. I watched a lot of incredible documentaries about the time period as well.
Was there anything that got left on the cutting room floor that you're sad about? Or are you somebody who leaves stuff and it's fine?
Oh yeah, there were I never miss it. Like once it's done, once I cut it out, for me it's like, yes, great. Never look back on that. And because it really makes it, for me, it's like this is the stronger book, and sometimes you're holding on to that stuff and you just can't let go of it. So I had these sections, like Brian's sections took the longest to sort of figure out. I didn't know in the beginning that it would be set up as a sort of video diary. At some point I had him like keeping a journal, and I was just trying to figure out how to frame his sections. And so I had all these sections that were, I think they were cut out before I think Hub City saw them. Meg is here. Which were these sort of like third person sections in like just like clips of what the movie would look like. So like if he's filming, at his grandma's house with his uncles and everybody around. And they were these sort of like just 1 or 2 page scenes in third person, just kind of describing the scene. But they just weren't working in the end. They weren't revealing any kind of new information. I think I was just trying to use another point of view and maybe even more sort of poetic voice. And so.
Well, it's always a blessing to be like, and we're done with that. Like, it's great to feel like not only have you made the book tighter, but that it's, there's no regret, right? So you mentioned Hub City. Can you say a little bit about your journey to Hub City, and for folks who don't know the kind of press that Hub City is, anything you want to say about the team there?
Well, it's an amazing team. It's a very small team, and they're fantastic. And they're out Spartanburg, South Carolina. I actually connected to them through Wiley Cash. First introduced me to them. I didn't know about Hub City. They weren't on my radar. And Wiley and I ran into each other at AWP, and I told him that I was had this novel ready and been shopping it. And then I went over to their booth, and then later I think my agent sent the novel. But yes, that's how we first connected. But it's been fantastic. I mean, you saw what they did with the book. It's like,
perfect. Yeah.
And they also, Hub City is an independent press, but they also have a bookstore, and they're this nonprofit, and they do a lot of great community work. And I think they're really. I mean, Meg should really be the one talking here, but doing some really exciting, publishing some really exciting books, and I think really kind of opening up like what is Southern Lit, like what does that mean, and how can we make that more inclusive.
Yes, we always, Charis always looks at everything that Hub City does with excitement. So this was a really wonderful, this has been a good year for Hub City. Jessica has won some really special awards. She's published with Hub City, and so to have you on this press has been really just a nice serendipitous thing, because we just always are so thrilled, particularly when independent presses just do this level of packaging and quality of work. It's really amazing. So, oh yeah, look, there we go in the background.
Well, my Hub City.
Exactly. Well, so if folks don't have any more questions, is there anything else that we didn't get to that you're like, I want folks to know about this, or this was a thing that I, really loved learning about, or anything like that?
No, these were fantastic questions. Oh, Sarah.
Great. Oh, what are you working on now? The classic question. If any, also first, for no pressure, because we are in a pandemic. So if you're working on Netflix, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I've been working on revising a couple of essays and stories. That's really what I'm doing right now. I do have a new essay that I'm trying to write as well, but Meg knows this. But yeah, I haven't been able to write anything brand new, but also I'm kind of caught up in the excitement of getting the book out. So I figured I wouldn't have a lot of writing time around the launch of the book.
Yeah. Well, I know that we will be very excited for whatever comes next. And Sarah's saying enjoying it. So if folks don't have the book yet, you can purchase it via the link at the bottom. It says purchase The Prettiest Star from Charis. Carter is sending us signed book plates tomorrow, so we will have those. We'll be able to ship out very soon. And I'm sending you a donation link. If you would like to donate to our nonprofit, you can do that. All of our events are individually donor funded, so we make our money $5 at a time, and we really appreciate everything that our community does to help us stay afloat, especially right now. So I just want to say thanks to everyone on the chat. Thanks to Hub City and Meg Reed, and a big, huge thanks to Carter Sickels. I did blurb this book because I really just felt like I was sitting in like my family's living room, for better and for worse. But it's very rare to read a book that really feels like home in all of its complexity, and to really feel like, these are so often when we talk about the South or we talk about rural people, it is that like everybody's a villain or everybody's a saint, and it's like these people are people, and I think you capture that so well, and we get to really live with them and be in their hearts, and I think that's such a rare a rare thing. So I hope that if y'all don't have this book yet, you get it right now. We'll send it to you in just a couple days. And tell your friends about it. Tell everybody if they haven't heard, they need to read this, and you also need to read The Evening Hour. And then hopefully we'll get to watch it soon in its film form as soon as it gets distribution. But thanks so much, Carter. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been great. And thank you all for coming. And it's great to see so many friends and others. And thanks, ER. This has been fantastic interview. And please do support Charis Books and support all independent bookstores. Everybody's hurting right now. So don't just buy my book. I mean, buy my book, but buy others too, please.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is this will immediately be available for rebroadcast. Like as soon as we're off, you can just use this link and share it so folks can watch it immediately. And then in a couple of days, I'm going to get this repackaged on YouTube, and then it'll be a closed caption. So if there's anybody in your community who's deaf or hard of hearing that needs the captions, those will be available hopefully within the week. So you can also share the link on YouTube. But we'd love for more people to watch this and know about this important book. So please share that link if you can. Everybody be safe and well. Until next time, take care and go play some David Bowie.